The silence that followed the gunfire was heavier than the dust settling on the saloon floor. Among the fallen, a young woman lay bleeding, her eyes fixed on the man who had led the massacre. Her trembling hand reached out, a silent plea for help. He saw it, he felt it, and then he turned his back, leaving her to the darkness. But the unforgiving spirit of the Old West had a way of twisting fates, of demanding more than just blood and silver. What happens when a hardened outlaw confronts a spark of unexpected humanity? And what price must be paid for a single act of impossible mercy? Before we ride into this gritty tale, tell us in the comments. Where are you joining us from today? Join us now as we revisit the fateful night at the Silver Creek Saloon. The sun was already dipping below the western hills, painting the endless prairie sky in streaks of fiery orange and bruised purple. As Virgil McGraw's gang approached the Silver Creek Saloon, it was a forgotten outpost, a collection of weathered planks and a single lantern casting a faint, hopeful glow against the encroaching twilight. Tucked away far enough that no gunshots would echo back to town, it was a place where the wind stirred dust on the packed earth, and lamplight was just beginning to bloom inside. A half-dozen men huddled over their drinks, their faces etched with the hard lines of a life lived on the edge. In a shadowed corner, two painted women whispered secrets, their laughter brittle and quick. And by the makeshift stage, Daisy Delaney, the saloon singer, a woman barely 20 with a voice that carried the weight of too many dusty miles, was quietly tuning her guitar, preparing for the night's mournful melody. It was a haven for tired souls, a place where oblivion could be found at the bottom of a glass. Then the door groaned open. 5 armed men strode in, their silhouettes momentarily eclipsing the last vestiges of daylight, as if hell itself had arrived prematurely. Virgil McGraw, an imposing figure of 32, led the charge, his steel-gray eyes sweeping the room, calculating, predatory. Behind him moved Ezekiel Boone, 35, Virgil's loyal right hand, his gaze as sharp as a Bowie knife. Harlan Yates, a cold and implacable gunman of 30, followed, his hand hovering near his holster. Clay Donovan, 28, impulsively violent, smirked at the patrons. And bringing up the rear, the youngest and most reckless, 27-year-old Rufus Pike. His eagerness almost childlike yet deadly. A sudden, chilling hush fell over the saloon. The clinking of glasses, the low murmurs, even Daisy's quiet strumming, all ceased. Every eye turned to the newcomers, recognizing the unspoken threat. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken dread. Daisy, her fingers frozen on the strings, glanced up, her heart catching in her throat. The song died before it had a chance to begin. What followed was a maelstrom of terror and brutality. The saloon transformed into a slaughterhouse in the blink of an eye. Bottles exploded against walls, sending amber liquid and shards of glass flying. Bodies crumpled to the sawdust-strewn floor, some with a surprised gasp, others with a guttural cry cut short. The air was ripped apart by screams, sharp and desperate, until they too dissolved into an eerie, blood-soaked silence. The stench of gunpowder mingled with stale whiskey and fresh fear. Daisy, her face pale with terror, scrambled for the back door, her slender frame a desperate blur against the chaos. But fate was a cruel mistress. A stray bullet, meant for no one in particular, found its mark, striking her in the back. She gasped, a choked cry escaping her lips, and fell, her simple dress clinging to the grimy wooden floor, crimson blooming rapidly around her, a dark stain spreading outwards. When the carnage finally subsided, only the heavy breathing of the gang and the faint crackle of distant embers broke the silence. The floor was a mosaic of shattered glass, overturned tables, crumpled bodies, and scattered coins. The gang moved with practiced efficiency, their boots crunching over the fallen, gathering money, watches, jewelry, even leather boots from the dead. Amidst the ruthless pilfering, Virgil paused. His gaze fell upon Daisy. She lay still, barely breathing, her eyes, wide and misted with pain, fixed on him. In that moment, her plea was not just for help, but for a glimmer of human decency. Her hand, trembling, reached out to him, a fragile gesture in a world of stark brutality. "Help me, please," she whispered, her voice a ragged breath, barely audible above the ringing in his ears. Virgil remained motionless, a statue carved from granite, his face unreadable. Ezekiel, ever practical, ever focused on the task at hand, pulled at his arm. "Leave her, boss. She'll die anyway. We ain't got all night." Virgil's eyes flickered, closing for a single, agonizing second. In that fleeting moment, he saw not just a dying woman, but something deeper, a vulnerability that transcended the violence, a flicker of kindness that dared to ignite even in the heart of the most hardened man. He opened his eyes, the resolve hardening his features. Without a word, he turned his back. The thud of hooves receding into the dark prairie night was the last sound Daisy Delaney heard before darkness claimed her. Later, in their secluded hideout, nestled deep within a jagged canyon, the rest of the gang celebrated. Whiskey flowed freely, laughter, coarse and loud, echoed off the rock walls, and the clinking of stolen coins punctuated their triumphant boasts. Clay bragged about a particularly lucrative pocket watch. Rufus downed a shot of rye, his grin wide, while Harlan calmly recounted his kills. Ezekiel, ever watchful, ensured the loot was properly tallied. But Virgil, though present, was not truly there. He sat apart, a bottle of whiskey clutched in his hand, its fiery contents doing little to warm the chill that had settled in his bones. The celebratory shouts of his men seemed distant, muted. He drank until his throat burned, but the heat of the liquor was nothing compared to the slow, relentless ache of guilt that gnawed at him. He couldn't shake her gaze, Daisy's eyes, not just filled with desperation, but with something more profound, a pure, unadulterated plea for kindness, a fragile flame that pierced even his callous soul, demanding a response he had denied. It wasn't just the image of her bleeding on the floor. It was that spark, that unasked-for connection that refused to fade. The celebratory fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows, but Virgil saw only her face in the flames. The whiskey tasted like ashes. He knew, with a certainty that both terrified and compelled him, that he couldn't leave her to die. Not like that, not after that look. In the dead of night, while his men slept soundly, sated by their spoils and drink, Virgil rose. He mounted his horse, the leather groaning under his weight, and rode back towards the Silver Creek. He didn't look back at the flickering embers of the gang's fire. He didn't look back at the life he had chosen, the path he had forged in blood and greed. His focus was fixed on the desolate saloon, a place he had just turned into a graveyard, driven by a flicker of conscience he thought long extinguished. The moon, a pale sliver in the vast western sky, was his only witness as he rode towards an uncertain redemption. The Silver Creek Saloon was a mausoleum under the pale moon, the air heavy with blood and echoes of screams. Daisy lay still, a fragile heap, her skin cold, her breath a faint whisper against the vast silence. Virgil dismounted, his spurs jingling softly, kneeling beside her. Her pulse, though weak and thready, persisted, a stubborn spark. He lifted her carefully, her feather-light weight against his chest, the slick warmth of her blood seeping through her dress. With Daisy cradled in front of him, he mounted his horse, turning his back on the carnage, on the twisted remnants of his past. He rode silently under the sliver of moon, towards his isolated ranch, a humble structure of weathered wood that smelled of old smoke. Inside his cabin, dimly lit by dying embers, he laid her gently on his cot. Her pallor was stark against the rough wool blanket. His medical knowledge was sparse, gleaned from patching up bullet wounds on men, but he worked with a newfound dedication. He tore strips from an old shirt, improvised bandages, and stoked the fire, setting water to boil. With agonizing care, he cleaned the angry wound on her back, his large fingers surprisingly nimble yet hesitant, performing a task they had never served with such tenderness. He wrapped the makeshift bandages, securing them as best he could, his brow furrowed in concentration. Hours later, as dawn light seeped through the window, Daisy stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, slowly focusing on the unfamiliar wooden ceiling, then on him. Virgil McGraw. The man who had led the massacre, the one who had turned his back. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She recoiled, pushing herself up with a desperate surge of adrenaline. But the agonizing pain overwhelmed her, sending a wave of dizziness. She cried out, falling back onto the cot, trembling. "Why you?" she rasped, terror and confusion warring in her voice. He didn't answer. His face remained unreadable. He simply rose, re-wetting the compress on her forehead. His touch as gentle as he could manage. His eyes firm, intense, never leaving hers. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions and fear. In the days that followed, Daisy waged a silent war of resistance. She refused the simple food he offered, her jaw set, insisting she would leave as soon as she had strength. Virgil didn't stop her, but neither did he cease his relentless, quiet care. He brought her water, changed her bandages, built the fire. He hunted for game, gathered firewood, foraged for herbs. Each night, Daisy heard him pacing, restless, like a caged animal. Each dawn, he returned, laden with provisions, signs of a care she never asked for, yet undeniably kept her alive. The ranch was a precarious sanctuary, built on blood and an impossible act of grace. Daisy's body slowly healed, but distrust festered. She watched him, wary, searching for the monster, yet finding only a quiet, stoic presence that defied her understanding. Time, however, had strange ways of drawing enemies closer. One fierce night, a storm raged, the wind howling, rain lashing against the cabin. Daisy, weak and desperate for water, tried to rise. Her legs buckled, and dizziness washed over her. She swayed, about to collapse. Virgil, by the fire, was on his feet in an instant, catching her before she fell. Her frail body slumped against his chest. Too weak to resist, too overwhelmed, she found herself held steady in his strong arms. For a long moment, the world narrowed to his steady heartbeat and the booming thunder. When she slowly opened her eyes, pressed against him, she saw the jagged scar along his jawline, a testament to a brutal life. But she also saw the hidden weariness behind his hardness. In that precise, unexpected instant, something within her cracked. Against all logic, she felt safe. The barrier crumbled completely a few days later. As he helped change her bandages, his large hands working with careful clumsiness, Daisy reached out. Perhaps unintentional, a subconscious craving for connection. She grasped his hand, her fingers surprisingly firm. Virgil flinched, trying to pull away, but she held on, her gaze unwavering. Their eyes locked, a silent current arcing between them, burning away layers of resentment, fear, and unspoken desire. Then, as if all the pent-up rage, terror, and yearning exploded, they kissed. It was rough, urgent, a desperate clash of bruised souls. But as the initial shock faded, it softened, transforming into a tender surrender, a recognition of something unexpected and profound. In that small, silent cabin, surrounded by wilderness, they belonged. From that night on, they were no longer prisoner and survivor, but lovers, bound by a dangerous secret, carving out a fragile intimacy in the unforgiving West. From that night on, the small cabin in the lonely mountains became a fragile, dangerous world. Weeks passed in a deceptive calm. Daisy, fully recovered, hummed forgotten melodies as she moved about the kitchen, her voice carrying a private lightness. Virgil, the grim outlaw, found a new rhythm to his days. He'd watch her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, occasionally letting out light, free laughter when she playfully chastised him. These were stolen moments, fragile as spun glass, revealing new facets of both of them. Daisy, once defined by fear, now radiated quiet resilience. Virgil found a softness he hadn't known existed, his eyes lingering on her with tender, fierce protection. They lived in an unspoken truce, a dangerous intimacy defying their violent past. But such happiness had an expiry date. One crisp afternoon, as the sun painted the mountains gold, a solitary rider approached, Ezekiel Boone, Virgil's second-in-command, worn from a long ride, had come to discuss upcoming robberies, unaware of the profound shift in his leader's life. As Ezekiel dismounted, he heard it, a faint, melodic hum, a woman's voice. A woman? At Virgil's isolated ranch? Curiosity, sharp and immediate, overcame his caution. He moved towards the cabin, his footsteps soft, hand instinctively on his revolver. Nearing the window, he paused, leaning in, then cautiously peered through a gap in the faded curtains. What he saw stole his breath. Inside, bathed in the warm, golden light, was Daisy Delaney, the saloon singer, the woman they had left for dead at Silver Creek. She was not just alive. She was vibrant, healthy, her eyes sparkling, and she was on Virgil's lap, head thrown back in soft laughter, tracing the scar on his jaw. Virgil, face relaxed and unguarded, held her close, a tender smile on his lips, a sight Ezekiel had never witnessed. The image was an intimate tableau of domestic bliss, utterly shocking, unthinkable. Ezekiel froze, his mind reeling. Daisy, alive, at Virgil's ranch, laughing with him. The words hammered in his skull. Witness, threat, betrayal. He made no sound, called out nothing. He simply backed away, slowly, silently, eyes fixed on the impossible scene. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode back, a cold, hard knot forming in his gut. Robbery plans forgotten, replaced by a far more dangerous revelation. That night, around the gang's flickering campfire, Ezekiel, grim-faced, his voice carefully controlled, broke the news. "She's alive," he stated, his gaze sweeping across Harlan, Clay, and Rufus. "The boss. He's hiding the woman at the ranch." A stunned silence fell, then a collective wave of disbelief and fury. Harlan Yates, his impassive face contorted in a snarl, slammed his fist on a crate. "Alive! If she opens her mouth, we're all dead." Clay Donovan, quick to violence, spat on the ground. "That whore could hang us all." Rufus Pike, youthful recklessness tinged with fear, nervously cleaned his nails with his knife. The implications were chillingly clear. A living witness, a direct link to the Silver Creek massacre. The law would ride them down. And Virgil, their leader, had kept her alive, hidden her, even grown fond of her. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a profound betrayal of their code, their survival. The next night, the entire gang gathered in a tense, hushed circle. Virgil was there, his presence heavy, his face stern, meeting each of their gazes without flinching. They approached him with words, sharp and accusatory, cutting deeper than any knife. "Virgil," Harlan began, low and deceptively calm, "we need to talk about this situation." Clay chimed in, "It ain't right, boss. Keeping a witness alive? That's just asking for trouble." Rufus, emboldened, added, "The law, Virgil. They'll track her down, then us." Each argument was spat out like stones, hard and unyielding. They spoke of prudence, the necessity to silence witnesses, the unforgiving reach of the law. The memory of Daisy bleeding now surfaced as a damning accusation against Virgil. They didn't understand. Virgil listened, his face a mask. He allowed each bitter word to wash over him. But when he finally straightened, his imposing figure casting a long shadow, his decision was clear. His voice, low and dangerous, resonated with authority. "No one," he declared, his gaze sweeping each man, "no one touches her. My word is law." The silence that followed was not one of obedience. It was a thick, resentful quiet, heavy with unspoken defiance. A dangerous spark flickered in their eyes. It wasn't just fear of a witness. It was the chilling realization that Virgil was no longer the man they knew. His blood, they feared, had run soft, corrupted by a woman. The leader they followed was showing a weakness they couldn't afford, a weakness that could cost them their lives. The seeds of mutiny had been sown. The resentment that had settled over the gang's fire that night was a palpable thing, a heavy shroud woven from fear and burgeoning treachery. Virgil's command had been clear, his authority absolute, but the silence it evoked was far from obedience. It was the quiet of men driven to a desperate crossroads, their loyalty now outweighed by the chilling instinct for self-preservation. Later, as the first hint of false dawn painted the eastern sky with muted grays and lavenders, Virgil and Daisy lay intertwined in the warm confines of their cabin. He held her close, her head resting on his chest, the soft rhythm of her breathing a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his outlaw world. In this stolen peace, he found a solace that he hadn't known was possible, a fleeting forgetfulness of the dangers that lurked just beyond the cabin walls. But miles away, under the cloak of the same fading night, the rest of the gang was already in motion. Harlan Yates, having returned to the main hideout after the tense confrontation, joined Ezekiel Boone, Clay Donovan, and Rufus Pike. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering light of a small, discreet fire, were grim and hardened. The air was thick with whispered accusations and simmering rage. Ezekiel Boone, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a mix of disappointment and cold fury, took charge. He had been Virgil's most trusted confidant, his right hand, and the perceived betrayal cut him deepest. "He's gone soft." Ezekiel's voice was a low growl, barely audible above the wind soughing through the canyon. "Lost his mind over a saloon singer. We warned him, told him what a live witness means." Clay Donovan, ever the impulsive hothead, clenched his fists. "He chose her over us, over his own damn neck." Harlan, usually the voice of cold reason, nodded slowly, his face grim. "A witness, alive, is a noose for every one of us. And if Virgil protects her, then he's no longer our leader. He's a traitor." Rufus Pike, the youngest, his boyish face contorted with a mixture of fear and bravado, added, "He turned his back on us the moment he turned his back on her at Silver Creek. We should have known then." The conclusion was brutal, unavoidable, hammered home with the cold logic of men living outside the law. Daisy could not be allowed to live. She was a walking, breathing threat, a ticking time bomb. And if Virgil, their former leader, chose to protect her, then he too had become a liability. He was no longer their chief. He was a traitor, a threat to their survival, and he would have to be eliminated. The decision, though painful for some, particularly Ezekiel, was unanimous. Self-preservation trumped all else in their brutal world. The plan for the ambush was traced out in hushed tones, drawn in the dirt with sticks, then wiped away. It was a cold, calculated strike, tightening like a noose around their unsuspecting victims. They would ride to the ranch, surprise them, and end it. No mercy. The night of the ambush arrived, black and starless, a canvas devoid of moonlight. The prairie seemed to hold its breath, a vast, silent expanse under the heavy sky. For horses approached the isolated cabin, their hooves barely disturbing the dry grass, their riders moving like ghosts in the profound darkness. Boone led the way, his face a grim mask, his loyalty now redirected towards the survival of the gang, even if it meant destroying the man he once called brother. Harlan Yates rode beside him, his gaze fixed on the cabin like a predatory animal stalking its prey. Clay Donovan, his hand already on his revolver, radiated a suppressed eagerness for the coming violence. Rufus Pike, though fearful, rode with a grim determination, convinced this was the only way. As they drew closer, the wind, usually a bearer of earthy scents, now carried a faint, acrid smell, the unmistakable tang of kerosene. They had planned to burn the cabin, to leave no trace, no witness. It was a brutal, efficient strategy, one Virgil himself might have devised in another life. Inside the cabin, the only sound was the soft, even breathing of Daisy, nestled against Virgil. He, however, had always been a man of sharp instincts, finely honed by years of living on the edge of danger. A subtle sound, a faint, almost imperceptible creak of old wood from outside, a twig snapping under an unseen boot, stirred him from a light sleep. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert, the hair on the back of his neck rising. He lay still for a moment, listening, straining to discern the noise from the usual night sounds of the wilderness. Then, a distinct shift in the air, a scent that prickled at his nostrils. Kerosene. A cold dread coiled in his gut. He knew exactly what it meant. He gently, but urgently, shook Daisy awake. "Daisy, wake up. Get behind the wardrobe. Now." His voice was a low, urgent whisper, laced with an undeniable command. Daisy, disoriented, blinked at him, but seeing the grim determination in his eyes, the immediate, stark danger etched on his face, she didn't question. She scrambled out of the bed, her heart pounding, and squeezed herself behind the heavy wooden wardrobe, pressing against its cold, solid back. Virgil, his movements swift and practiced, grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. He checked the chamber, the familiar weight of the Winchester a grim comfort in his hands. He knew this fight was coming, had felt the tension building like a storm. He hadn't expected it tonight, not like this. But he was ready. He moved to the small, grimy window, peering out into the oppressive darkness. Shadows moved. 4 of them. No, 5. The gang was here. His gang. He didn't have long to wait. The first makeshift firebomb, a bottle filled with kerosene and a burning rag, arced through the blackness. It exploded against the cabin wall, just below the window, erupting in a sudden, furious bloom of orange and yellow flames. The ranch, until now hidden in the moonless night, was violently illuminated by the hungry, crackling inferno. The night was instantly ripped apart by the deafening crackle of burning wood and the savage roar of gunfire. Virgil and Daisy, trapped, now found themselves plunged into a desperate, bloody fight for their very survival. The silence of their fragile world shattered, replaced by the chaotic symphony of betrayal and death. The Molotov cocktail exploded against the cabin wall, erupting in furious orange and yellow flames, tearing through the moonless night. Gunfire erupted, mingling with the crackle of burning wood and whistling bullets. Virgil, rifle in hand, moved like a predator. Daisy, huddled behind the wardrobe, heart hammering, felt their sanctuary become a fiery tomb. Virgil knew his men. He anticipated Harlan Yates, the cold gunman, would be first to rush. A shadow detached from the flames, sprinting low towards the main window. Virgil's Winchester barked once, sharply, and Harlan Yates stumbled, crumpled to the earth, lifeless, his momentum carrying him into a smoldering pine. But there was no pause. Clay Donovan, impulsive and violent, surged from the other side, firing on the remaining window. Glass exploded inward, showering Daisy, who cried out, shielding her face from the shrapnel, pressing deeper into her hiding spot. The air filled with acrid smoke and the terrifying scent of kerosene. Meanwhile, Rufus Pike, reckless as ever, tried to breach the rear door. He kicked violently, the old wood groaning, splinters flying. Daisy, terror-struck, heard the thudding. Her eyes darted, landing on a heavy-gauge shotgun Virgil had left leaning against the wall. A primal surge of adrenaline coursed through her. This was about their survival. With desperate strength, she grabbed the heavy weapon. As Rufus's boot finally broke through the door, his cruel smirk appearing, Daisy lifted the shotgun. She didn't aim. She just pointed. The roar of the blast was deafening. The close-range shot ripped into Rufus, lifting him off his feet. His smirk vanished, replaced by stunned disbelief, and he toppled backward, falling lifelessly to the ground. The fight raged. Virgil, dodging Clay's bullets, fired back, forcing Clay to retreat into the choking smoke. The cabin groaned, beams catching fire, the roof sagging. The heat was unbearable. Then, through the inferno, a lone figure emerged from the front door. Ezekiel Boone, Virgil's most loyal man, his face grim with pain and cold resolve. He entered the burning cabin, revolver drawn, his gaze locking with Virgil's across the fiery wreckage. It was a silent duel, a painful farewell between brothers in arms. Ezekiel raised his revolver, hand steady, but his eyes flickered for a fleeting second, a ghost of their shared history. That agonizing second of hesitation, that flicker of lingering humanity, was all Virgil needed. Virgil's revolver roared. The bullet tore through Ezekiel's chest. Boone gasped, eyes wide with shock and resignation. He swayed, then sank to his knees, toppling face first into the burning embers. The gunshots ceased. An eerie, profound silence descended, broken only by the hungry crackle of flames consuming the cabin. Virgil, his left shoulder bleeding freely from a splinter wound, stumbled. He used his rifle as a crutch, making his way to Daisy. She emerged from behind the wardrobe, face streaked with soot and tears, eyes wide with horror and relief. She ran to him, holding him with fierce strength. He leaned into her embrace, the raw pain dulled by her presence. "We have to go," he rasped. Together, they stumbled out, the inferno lighting their escape. The loyal horse waited at the back. Virgil hoisted Daisy on, then pulled himself up, grunting in pain. He didn't look back. The cabin, their fragile haven, now a raging bonfire, crumbled into ashes, taking with it every last tie Virgil had to his outlaw past. In the days that followed, they rode east, putting distance between themselves and the desolate prairie. They found refuge in a small, abandoned house high in the distant mountains. There, amidst the cold, quiet walls, they began to heal. Daisy regained her strength, the faint scar on her back a reminder of a life reborn. Virgil shed the cloak of his past, learning to wake without guilt, and to fall asleep with Daisy beside him, a warmth he once thought impossible. There was no more gold, no more violence, no more blood. Only the quiet murmur of the mountain creek, the scent of pine, and the certainty that, despite everything, a future, however humble, still existed. The West could be cruel, but for Daisy Delaney and Virgil McGraw, in that forgotten corner, something rare remained, the chance to stay together. Against all odds, against death and betrayal, two hearts found each other amidst massacre, survived fire and treachery, and chose to live as accomplices in a love no outlaw, no law, no force of the Wild West could extinguish. The smoke cleared, but the echoes of gunfire lingered, ghosts of a brutal past clinging to the mountain air. In the crucible of fire and betrayal, Virgil McGraw, the hardened outlaw, and Daisy Delaney, the saloon singer, forged a bond as resilient as the granite peaks that now sheltered them. Their escape, a desperate ride through a night lit by the embers of their former life, marked not an ending, but a harrowing beginning. They built a new existence from the ashes, finding solace in the quiet rhythms of a life free from gold and blood, discovering a profound peace in each other's presence. The West, a land of unforgiving cruelty, paradoxically offered them a chance at redemption, proving that even in the most desolate corners, hope and a fierce, unexpected love can take root. Their story reminds us that choice, even amidst the most dire circumstances, holds the power to reshape destiny. Virgil, confronted with a moment of raw humanity, chose mercy over ruthlessness, and in doing so, chose a path of unforeseen grace. Daisy, facing certain death, found an inner strength that defied her perceived fragility. This wasn't merely a tale of survival, but of transformation, of two souls finding light where only shadows had once fallen. What do you think of Virgil's impossible decision to save Daisy? Would you have risked everything for a flicker of conscience? Or would you have chosen the path of pragmatic survival? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've been captivated by this journey through the unforgiving frontier, immerse yourself further in the legends of the untamed territories by watching our other videos. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Whispers of the West for more tales of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring spirit of an era long past. Until next time, may your trails be true and your spirit untamed.